In order to promote his abuse of power, Donald Trump is claiming everything's an emergency. Everything falls within his ambit as a national security crisis, a foreign policy crisis, an enemy incursion, an alien invasion, a war. Why does he do that? Because he wants judges to defer to him, to back off and not provide any check and balance against his abuse of power, because he wants them to defer to his factual assessment on the ground. There's a rebellion in California. There's a rebellion or insurrection in D.C. We have to impose tariffs on the world. Venezuela has attacked us. And he wants the judges to bend the knee, but they're not. And I can't think of anybody better to talk about this with and kick it around than Hina Shamsi. She is the director of the National Security Project at the American Civil Liberties Union. There's no organization that's on the forefront of going after Donald Trump and making him stop abusing power in courts like the American Civil Liberties Union. And I just had an amazing interview with her where she briefed our audience about what we are watching and why we are watching and how the ACLUs of the world and federal judges of the world are working overtime to rein in Donald Trump as he tries to use the military on domestic soil in violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. And she sets it up for us in such an exquisite way. I didn't want you to miss it. Here's my interview with ACLU's National Security Director, Hina Shamsi. Donald Trump, as we know, has been using false claims of emergencies in America, emergency powers that he needs to have, national security crises, because that's a way for him to try to blow through the separation of powers and aggrandize even more power, as we're watching really the only presidency in modern history that at least publicly, with Nixon, it was behind the scenes, but publicly, we're just lurching from one abuse of power to the next. And what we want to do here on Legal AF is bring in experts to brief our audience about these issues. I mean, as I like to joke, with my 35 years of trial experience, I can bring people to the courthouse and even to the front door of the courtroom. But for the people that are in the courtroom or advising the people in the courtroom who are on the front lines, the first responders for our democracy in the courtrooms, we got to bring in the experts. And I'm so pleased today to have Hina Shamsi, who is the director of the National Security Project at the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. And everybody knows who follows Legal AF, how it warms the cockles of my heart to talk about the ACLU and the work that they're doing in the trenches. I mean, we talk about the attorneys general and the 50 cases they filed. We've talked about the public interest groups like Democracy Forward and the ones that they filed. But the American Civil Liberties Union, both in the first term and in the second term of Trump, are really leading the charge. So I want to bring in Hina Shamsi. Hina, welcome to Legal AF.
It's my pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we were joking before we started recording that, to give our audience more confidence and make them sleep better at night after the election and before the inauguration, I was downloading the ACLU briefing book about every major issue from reproductive rights, women's rights, immigration rights. And boy, did you guys get it right in your brief about what was going to happen with this administration, to give my audience confidence about how groups like the ACLU on the front lines were prepared for the Trump administration. And now some people might have thought, wait, the ACLU has a national security unit within it to talk about everything from constitutional compliance of presidential policy to human rights to civil rights. Why? Well, now we see why. We see a president who's using the mantle, the fake mantle of national security threats to try to cram down I'll call it his unconstitutional abuse of power. So why don't you bring our audience up to speed? What keeps you up at night, and what is your project and the ACLU doing about it?
Well, I have to say that there is a long list of things that keeps me up at night. One of them that we started working on, and I really appreciate you shouting out our briefing papers before, because we did spend a lot of time just thinking through what has he urged before, what are the kinds of national security issues that have come up since my project was founded in about 2004, because presidential abuse of power isn't new in our democracy, but we were worried, particularly after his first administration and the things that we saw there, that it would become that much more extreme. And one of the things that we were most concerned about is the abusive use of the military on domestic soil. And the ways in which federal civilian law enforcement and intelligence agencies could be further turned inward against our own population. And those are the things that I think are really coming into play. These are the things that we started preparing for, I want to say about a year ago, particularly with respect to the deployment of the military. And we saw that come into play with California and now with DC. And I think that the use or invocation of national security or emergency powers is being used by this president as essentially a blank check to bypass laws and checks and balances in ways that are harmful to our people, as well as the communities and institutions that are involved.
Was his attempted use of the military and using the Joint Chiefs and all with the protests that were at the White House in his first term, where there was reporting that he was even saying shoot them, and then using the military or trying to use the military, was that your first inkling that this was a president who saw the military as a weapon he could use to enforce his policy and against the American people?
That was certainly the first concrete inkling, but I just remind our listeners that these are the use of the military, something that he'd been threatening in campaign speeches for far longer than that, and that escalated. And so, you know, you had different permutations. He was talking about it, I mean, to the extent that you could try and impose logic upon what was being said. The strands were to abuse that power to suppress protest, and then potentially for immigration purposes, which we are seeing play out now in a variety of different ways. And then the move that he made recently in DC was to go from what it was in California, for example, where the excuse was emergency and need to bring in the Marines and federalize the California National Guard because dissent was being seen as a form of rebellion that justified this extreme measure. And DC, the move has been now to crime. Baseless claims of crime rates that are absolutely not what he says that they are, to justify something that is really a breathtakingly dangerous power grab that, you ask what keeps me up at night, widespread violations of our civil rights and civil liberties.
Yeah, and that's going to make our audience feel better that somebody like you is up at night about these issues. On the and then you read, just to stay in DC for a minute, then you read Bondi's new directive. It has nothing to do with violent crime and why Big Balls was jumped by a bunch of 15-year-olds. It's about homeless encampments and immigration policy. And I'm like, well, that's what they're doing? I thought there was a crime wave. I didn't realize there was an immigration crime wave going on in DC. So what he says out loud and what he says in court or in his or in filings are often, am I right, two different things.
Well, it's sort of I was listening to his speech when he was announcing this, and it was like, again, why are you doing this? It's everything to show off to Putin, to crime, to immigration, to whatever else.
The 3-day trial in front of Judge Breyer starting that day on the Posse Comitatus Act.
Yeah. So, if we break it down and we look at what was actually happening and claimed in DC, the president has, as you know, certain unique authorities given DC's unique status, which is why our affiliate and others have been calling for statehood. DC does not have the protections of federalism that states do. So he invoked Section 740 of the Home Rule Act to take over the police department. There was a lawsuit challenging that from the Attorney General, and so that's been pulled back a bit. But you're exactly right that Pam Bondi has directed the Metropolitan Police Department to assist in the enforcement of immigration law in any way deemed necessary by the federal government, notwithstanding that DC had sanctuary laws which limit information sharing and collaboration between local police and federal immigration agents.
Yeah. And so let's turn, that's a good pivot point. Let's turn to Donald Trump claiming everything's an emergency, everything's a national security threat to justify things that aren't even remotely connected, no connective tissue between, I wrote down some policies about FEMA and national security, immigration, veterans affairs. Paul Blumenthal, who's a friend of Legal AF, just did a great, I'm sure you caught it, a great article in HuffPo about this, the crying of national security as a way to try to get obedience from judges, or at least judicial deference. And I think they, I want to get your opinion, of course. I think they were buoyed in the White House because, in a couple of these orders on the shadow docket, the Supreme Court said, well, you're getting into the area of national security. Oh, that seems to be, you got to be careful. Got to be careful, Judge Zinnes. And Abrego Garcia, you're treading into this. Be careful. And then, of course, Stephen Miller and the rest of the people in the White House were like, yes, we just call everything national security. What's your take on all of that?
I mean, my take is that this is at the heart of not only so many of the lawsuits that we have filed in order to protect people's rights, ranging from our lawsuits challenging the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act to a variety of other policies, but it is a attempt by the administration to steamroll fundamental rights, right? Whether you're talking about, again, LA, and thank goodness for California's lawsuit there, which, if you'll recall, started out because there were immigration raids in California and people were protesting cruelty of their neighbors being snatched up. So it was a claim of national security and emergency power in that instance to suppress protest, right? So that's one example. We've got due process, we've got protest, we've got concerns about, Fourth Amendment search and seizure and checkpoints in DC and how they're going to be complied with. And so in one sense, going back to where you started out, what they're trying to do is say national security flag, emergency flag, which traditionally has meant that the courts would give deference. Courts give deference, for example, too much deference, as many of our lawsuits have argued, in the field of national security or foreign affairs. And the question becomes, do you give legal deference as well as factual deference, right? What is the scope of review that we apply? And so those are some of the tussles that are going on in court right now that are hugely, hugely consequential. In California, for example, and it's really astounding to read the filings of the federal government in California.
Talk about that. What's eye-popping for you, for our audience?
Well, so among the things that are eye-popping are issues that are going to have gone up to the Ninth Circuit at this point, which is the government is saying that the president essentially has authority that judges have to defer to. When he says emergency, judges have to step back.
That's it. It's over.
Right. And so what we're talking about is pitting of political theater and blatantly phony justifications for abuse of national security and emergency powers against our rights to protest, against our right to equal treatment, against our rights to freedom from, all of the Fourth Amendment guarantees. And so these are the things that are playing out now. But if I can, just one more thing, Mike.
Of course.
Which is, I really want people to take away also that even as he is doing this, and even as we had Marines and Federalized National Guard in California, or 18 federal agencies, civilian agencies with alphabet soup acronyms, or National Guard from DC to 5 other states that, as we're sitting here today, have said that they're going to be supporting the president by providing more National Guard. It does not matter what uniform they wear. They are all bound by the Constitution, and they are all bound by the Bill of Rights.
You're on Legal AF. Listen, I'm a 35-year federal trial lawyer and litigator. I've tried dozens and dozens of cases. And I can bring you as a commentator to the courthouse. I can bring you inside the courtroom, but I'm not litigating these cases. I'm using my observational skills and my commentary to break down the facts so that you know what's going on. That's why I need to bring on to Legal AF the newsmakers, the people that are in the trenches, who are filing the cases, who are litigating the matters, who are smelling the wood paneling in the courtrooms. And that's why I needed to bring the American Civil Liberties Union and Hina Shamsi to you. If you like what we're doing, there's a couple of ways to support us. One of them is go over to Legal AF, the Substack. That's an amazing community that we're building there as well. That is in collaboration with everything I do on Legal AF. We've got all of our contributors over there. We've got videos. We've got 2 live reports every day on Legal AF Substack, at the minute, at the market. I can bring you information there that I can't even bring in real time as quickly here on Legal AF, the YouTube channel, although it is important for the deep dive that we do here and the interviews that we do here. Legal AF Substack, and if you really want to help us, do a paid membership. We've got about 80,000 members who are basically not paid, and a whole handful that are now paid, which is great. We're going to approach 2,000 paid members. That's what helps us keep the lights on. That's what helps us pay for the production values, the content that you've come to enjoy. And in return, I'll give you some amazing content you can't find anywhere else except on Legal AF Substack. I think it's the cost of, a Starbucks coffee a month, something like that. So if you can swing it, we'd appreciate it. So until my next report, I'm Michael Popok. I'm Michael Popok, and I got some big news for our audience. Most of you know me as the co-founder of Midas Touch's Legal AF and the Legal AF YouTube channel, or as a 35-year national trial lawyer. Now, building on what we started together on Legal AF, I've launched a new law firm, the Popok Firm, dedicated to obtaining justice through compassionate and zealous legal representation. At the Popok Firm, we are focused on obtaining justice for those who have been injured or damaged by a life-altering event by securing the highest dollar recoveries. I've been tirelessly fighting for justice for the last 35 years, so my own law firm organically building on my Legal AF work just feels right. And I've handpicked a team of top-tier trial fighters and settlement experts throughout all 50 states known as big auto injury attorneys who have the know-how to beat heartless insurance companies, corporations, government entities, and their attorneys. Big Auto's attorneys working with my firm are rock stars in their respective states and collectively responsible for billions of dollars in recoveries. So if you or a loved one have been on the wrong side of a catastrophic auto, motor vehicle, rideshare, or truck accident, suffered a personal injury, or been the victim of medical malpractice, employment harassment or discrimination, or suffered a violation of your civil and constitutional rights, then contact the Popok Firm today at 1-877-POPOK-AF or by visiting my website at www.thepopokfirm.com and fill out a free case evaluation form. And if we determine that you have a case and you sign with us, We don't get paid unless you do. The Popok firm, fighting for your justice every step of the way.